Mass Media.
You're listening to Unseen Impact, where stories of injury become conversations about recovery and justice.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Rory Pendergast. I am the attorney at Rory Law, and today I am very excited. We have Dr. Bahreman here, a quadruple board certified. He is a neurologist. He deals with brain injuries, and so today we're here to talk about brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries, what they are, how they can come about, and kind of some of the things that you as the victim, you as a friend or family of the victim can do to help you, one, get to a neurologist and then help you with that process. I know from my own practice, the brain injuries can impact somebody from, a 50-mile-an-hour car crash, 50-mile-an-hour motorcycle crash, down to a very low-speed rear-end sort of whiplash injury. And the brain injury can impact everybody. But we don't want to hear just from me, because what do I know about it, right? We want to hear from the quadruple board certified doctor. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell us, so 4, not just 1, not just 2, not just 3, 4, what are your board certifications?
Again, thank you so much for having me here. I have 4 board neurology. Number 1 is general neurology and psychiatry. I am board certified in electrophysiology or neurophysiology. Also, I am certified in vascular neurology, or stroke neurology, and also brain injury medicine.
Okay, all right, which I think we're going to spend a bit of time today talking about. So should we get to it? Let's get to it.
Please.
What I want to kind of start out with is just tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a neurologist. How did you get into it? What are you doing right now?
Well, I am a neurologist by training. I started my residency back to 2001 in New York.
Okay.
I went to Einstein, New York for my neurology residency program. And after that, I went to University of Chicago. I finished fellowship in 2004, and also I started having other programs for extra training and fellowship. And about 2008, I moved from Chicago to San Diego.
Beautiful move.
It was a beautiful move, yes. And I started my own practice in neurology, and I'm here.
So now tell me, did you always know that you wanted to be a doctor? If so, did you always think, hey, neurology is where it's going to be? Tell us about your introduction and path to neurology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Interesting question. I was actually going to cardiology. That was my neurology was my second choice always. It's a very always been a difficult field for us. I mean, as a medical student, it's a kind of difficult field to go, and not many people are interested. And it was my second. Then I was trying to get to the cardiology program. The opportunity happened to go to neurology, and then I came to a neurology program. And then later on I saw, it's not going to be just a simple neurology. I have to go to a different fellowship program in order to be more trained and better trained. And one of them was a brain injury.
Okay.
And I finished that fellowship program, and I started practicing.
Well, and I got to think, especially around, that 2005, 2007, 2008, 2010, brain injuries were a big part of our world.
Absolutely. Especially 2001.
Yeah.
If I can say, when the September 11 happened, I was in New York. I was my last year of residency when that disaster happened to our country. That was a huge, we saw in New York, a huge aftermath, not just because of that day, because of the following complications and consequences in terms of PTSD and a lot of other psychological issues following that.
Well, and then with San Diego being such a huge military town, up into Pendleton, all of these things, I think that neurology is a really big field, particularly since we went into the Middle East, all of those sort of things. You have the service members coming back and they're having brain injuries, right? Or they're having all of these things going on.
That is correct.
And so, okay, so can I say, would we be able to say that your specialty is brain injuries? Or as a neurologist, what would you say your specialty or one of your specialties are?
I have, besides the general neurology, I have 3 extra fellowships and training. One of them is brain injury. I am also trained for vascular neurology or a stroke, and also for neurophysiology, electrodiagnostics as well.
All right. And then, so, we're here because talking as a personal injury attorney, I deal with folks who have brain injuries. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about is kind of, what is a brain injury? We see it all over the place with service members, with football concussions, with, I got a daughter who's playing soccer and they said they can't head the ball. So, I think anymore in today's age, brain injuries are known, or at least the words are known. But what is a brain injury?
Great question. While this is one of the most important topic in medicine, if I tell you that that's something that we don't see most of the time, we know it's there, but we don't see it, you can't believe me. This is one of the major cause of death in this country.
Brain injuries.
Brain injury.
Okay.
50,000 annual death is from the brain injury. Those are obvious cases. Yeah. But 80 to 90% of the traumatic brain injuries are mild. And we don't see anything. It's just the person with a history of injury, and we see the aftermath. And
so this is one of the things that I deal with on the attorney side is we hear mild traumatic brain injury, right? So if somebody says, I have a mild ankle sprain, to me that says it's not a big deal. So when somebody says mild traumatic brain injury, what does that mean?
First of all, if you go back to the definition of the brain injury, any chemical or structural alteration to the brain is called traumatic brain injury. Yeah. So any chemical or a structural alteration caused by any impact or insult or trauma is called traumatic brain injury. Obvious cases are having traumatic brain injury with structural changes. We see it in MRI, we see it in imaging and everything. Obviously, the patient having more problems. There is a type of traumatic brain injury, which is called mild traumatic brain injury. 80 to 90% of the cases are this range. And we only see the chemical changes. We're seeing the evidence or consequences of chemical alteration, and we don't see anything else. They called it mild based on the category and a classification that we have. It's called GCS score classification. Basically, it's a misnomer for this. This is, unfortunately, after many, many years, we have not come up with a better classification. And we are still using it based on the presentation, a clinical presentation at the time of the event.
And so that's the thing. So, for instance, for me as the personal injury attorney, that Glasgow score, that score that's happened, it's taken immediately. So you have somebody who's injured and they take some sort of this score that goes on, and that's kind of what becomes, that's in the records, and that's what people are looking at, right?
Absolutely. Again, unfortunately, we have not come up with a better way and accurate way to kind of classify the impact at the beginning with the outcome.
Yeah.
So when we are saying mild, it's a misnomer, in my opinion. 20 to 30% of the mild cases can have lifetime consequences and complications. So technically, not only they are not mild, actually they are very disabling. But based on the initial presentation, we call them mild, moderate, or severe.
Okay, and that can have a real consequence, whether it's a personal injury victim or whether it's somebody that shows up to see you, right? So if somebody has what is considered a mild traumatic brain injury and they show up to see you, they may not be presenting with these sort of catastrophic issues, but they have stuff going on, right?
Absolutely.
And so what are some of the things that you might do? Somebody describes for you, maybe they're in a rear-end car crash, and they describe how, hey, maybe there's not much property damage, but maybe they felt a big impact. Maybe their glasses moved on their head. Maybe they had a purse or book bag on their car, and that kind of pushed forward. So from physically, they had an impact. And then they start having all like funny stuff going on. And they eventually get to you. What are some of the first things that you as the neurologist are looking at for these so-called mild traumatic brain injuries?
My job first is to make a diagnosis, to see if the patient meets the criteria and guidelines for the diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury. That's the first thing I need to do. I have to look at the impact. The impact is the most important part of this diagnosis.
So you're talking about from that the initial sort of acute trauma, whatever it may have been, that's what you're concerned with?
Absolutely. There's no one symptom, even one, specific for traumatic brain injury. So all of those 20 symptoms or more than 20 symptoms that any patient with traumatic brain injury can have, they are non-specific for this diagnosis. So without impact and insult, we cannot get to this diagnosis.
So it's kind of like with a traumatic brain injury, it's more difficult. So for instance, if I show up and I've got a broken arm and you're looking at I show up at the ER, I've got this, I say, I've got this pain in my arm, and they take an x-ray, you can see the break in the x-ray. But you can't necessarily, so that emergency room doctor can't see that there's a break in your brain. So tell me about kind of how often are TBIs missed at the ER level?
There are multiple studies showing that there's a big number. It's from 20 to 35 to 40% of the patients in ER are missed for this diagnosis. The reason is this, because the focus at the emergency setting is on the trauma and the pain and fractures. Those are the most most important topics to figure out.
The ER doctor is there to save life and limb.
That is 100% correct. So that's the importance. That's the significance of this admission to the ER, to rule out those possibilities. Most of the times, not most of the times, I would say that about 20 to 30 to 40% of the cases, they miss it in the ER, not necessarily they want to miss this diagnosis, but because the focus is somewhere else. And also in the acute phase of the traumatic brain injury, most of the patients, almost everyone, has a pain component, neck pain, back pain, and physical pain. That's why even the patient is focusing on that.
So you're talking, sorry to interrupt, but so just so I understand this, because I think this is a very important part, right? So what you're saying is that you're talking about not physical pain that their head necessarily is hurting, is that so for instance, you get rear-ended, right? And so you have that whiplash. And so maybe your neck hurts, your back hurts. And so you have this lingering pain. So you show up to the ER and like anything this in life, the squeaky wheel gets greased, right? And your squeaky wheel back neck pain, that's squeaking hard. And so that's what's getting greased. Is that what you're saying here?
Absolutely.
Okay. So then eventually, this kind of, they get to you. And I guess the other thing is, from what you've described, neurology is complex, right?
Absolutely. Very complex.
So you have a lot going on in the ER, and so somehow it gets missed, but issues keep presenting themselves. And so somebody comes to you, and so let me ask you this one. Let's say somebody comes and they say, hey, I've got some issues, and I'm gonna ask you what particular issues, these 20, whatever else it may be that are symptoms of the brain injury. But somebody describes that, hey, I was rear-ended, and I got hit, and my head lurched back, and then went forward, and they say, hey, I didn't, in that rear-end car crash, I didn't lose consciousness. I saw some stars, but it was weird because my head didn't hit anything. As a neurologist, what's going through your mind?
Well, loss of consciousness used to be one of the significant evidence of having a traumatic brain injury. But we know that, and it's for many years now, there is no need to have a loss of consciousness. Impact or any kind of force or significant force on the head and neck structure, again, head and neck structure can cause a brain injury. So if you have a fall, if you have a good fall on your back and the neck, that force can transfer to the brain and cause this injury.
Now, the neck, so the head and neck, this is because whether you're falling or whether it's a car crash, we're looking at it's a whiplash motion. In the car accident, mainly, it's a whiplash motion. We're talking about because you have this skull, right? This hard skull. And inside you got like this gelatinous brain that's just kind of floating there. And so what is it that's connecting that gelatinous brain to the skull?
So brain is connected to the spinal cord. So spinal cord basically connect the brain to the spinal column.
Yeah.
And the brain is not connected to the skull, but there are layers of protection, including a water layer.
Okay.
Between the brain and also skull. So basically, brain is floating.
Okay.
In this skull.
So here we are. We've got our nice hard brain, and we've got we have our nice hard skull, and we have our floating little brain just loving life, sitting right there, and you have this sort of energy, as you're saying, right? And so let's say you get rear-ended and the head goes back, and so everything starts to move, right? But then the head, comes to the end of whether it hits the headrest behind you, the head starts to go forward. But the brain doesn't move, does it? Or it doesn't move at the same speed. It kind of crunches up, is a little bit slower, and then might go forward. Is that what I'm right with that sense?
I love the way that you explain, and so actually the brain moves inside. Okay. But it's better to say that. So we have two different density, two materials, one soft and one hard skull, and these two are having some normal movements with each other. Yeah. So they move with each other in a certain range. If the force is going to cause one of those materials moving faster than the other one and hitting the other one, we're going to see the damage. So basically, during like a rear end accident or a whiplash injury or any kind of head movement, we see the brain moving faster and hitting a more dense material, which is called skull, inside in different direction. That's why we see the different consequences on different part of the brain, and actually it helps us to see there was an injury in that direction.
Okay, all right. So in some sense, the traumatic brain injury, it's almost like two people dancing together that misstep.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so from what you're saying is that with the mild traumatic brain injury or the traumatic brain injury, it doesn't take a huge impact, meaning it doesn't take a 400-pound linebacker coming at you at 12 miles an hour and just clobbering you, right? It can be something smaller than that.
Absolutely. There was idea and also thought in that, for instance, the speed. Yeah. The car speed has to be above a certain limit in order to cause this. Yeah. But the researchers and his newest studies, the reconstruction model, is showing that no, you don't need to have major accident. And biomechanic, the event, is not, these days are not showing that. So you can have this traumatic brain injury with even less speed and less impact. However, you have to have a significant impact.
Yeah.
We don't have exactly a cutoff, but it has to be significant. So impact is the major part of this diagnosis. It's very important for us, or for people who are doing the med legal work, to make sure that their impact was there before getting to this route.
For the word impact, for the impact in a mild traumatic brain injury, is it talking about like something physically hitting the head, or are you just saying that whatever the impact is, some sort of change of force, change of energy, which then impacts the head and neck movement?
Absolutely. So any kind of force around the head and neck that can cause chemical or structural changes in the brain can cause traumatic brain injury.
And that's your mild traumatic brain injury.
That can be mild traumatic brain injury. But that can be mild, it can be any kind of injury. But most of the times the patient with a mild traumatic brain injury, they don't have a structural injury. They have chemical. That's why the imaging and the workup, especially in the emergency department, is negative. That's why they get discharged home. But later on, the next day, 2 days, 2 weeks, then you're going to see what is happening or what is going on.
So you're saying that from the mild or from the traumatic brain injury, you're saying you're gonna see on certain imaging, it might take a couple weeks in order for something to show up. That chemical change might take a couple weeks. You're saying that the symptoms are going to present themselves within a couple of weeks.
So most of the symptoms that we have is a result of the chemical imbalance. Happens.
And so what does that mean? So, because, some of the stuff it's fascinating for me who did not have a medical and does not have a medical background, right? But she just, I deal with medical issues every day as a personal injury attorney. But so it's fascinating to see what happens with the brain, with the body, and then even more so how a victim, how a personal injury victim, a claimant, a plaintiff, becomes a patient with the right doctor, right? Because what you're describing, hey, you break your arm at the ER, easy. Hey, we're going to send you to an orthopedic doctor. They're going to wrap you up. You're going to be good. Within however many weeks or months, you're going to be fine. But how is it that somebody gets to you? What are the symptoms that happen, or the symptoms that present itself to where somebody eventually gets to you as the neurologist?
Sure. Let's just go back again on the classification of the brain injury. 80 to 90% of the traumatic brain injuries are mild. What does it mean? There is a classification which I don't think is an appropriate classification, but it is. But when this patient comes to ER, even they do imaging, we do MRI even in ER, there is nothing there. The patient most of them have symptoms. Sometimes they don't have anything the first day. Next month we do imaging, the next day we do imaging, next 6 months we do imaging, it's still negative. But they are having the symptoms. So in order to make a diagnosis of mild traumatic brain injury, everything can be normal on the diagnostic part. So there is no need to have anything abnormal. Imaging, any blood work, anything. So you can have most of the disabling symptoms of mild traumatic injury, but every single workup is going to be negative, including imaging. So therefore, the structure is apparently intact with our current technology. Maybe in 10 years from now, we're going to see something. And we are getting there, actually. Our system is definitely improving. We are having new diagnostic findings. We are having new technologies that helping us definitely better than 10 years ago. But if the structure is normal and the patient having those symptoms, so basically we can say that they are based on chemical disruption. So the symptoms are, it's about 10 to 20 symptoms that we are dealing with almost for every patient. Some patients have 1 or 2, depends on the severity of the injury. Some patients have 20 of them. Some patients, in 1 month, they become symptom-free. Some people in 6 months, and some people never.
Is there any sort of kind of commonality you see with that? Is it that somebody shows up and you can say, oh, that person's going to be a month, that person's going to be 6 years, that person's going to be something else? Or is it just however the person shows up is how the person is?
Great question. As a kind of, based on the numbers and statistics that we have, most of the patients, 80 to 90% of the patient, they recover in the first 3 months.
Okay.
That's the data we have.
Okay.
Then the percentage of the patient get to the first half of, like 6 months after the accident. And the percentage get to the second year.
Okay.
We know that. There is no way to predict who is going to go there.
Okay.
There is no way to predict. However, there are 4 or 5, maybe 6 also factors that we know that if the patient already carrying one of those, for instance, pre-existing condition,
okay,
if they get subjected to a traumatic brain injury, they are having a little bit more chance to go toward their.
So then what are some of the pre-existing conditions? So if somebody they suffer an impact that's enough to cause the chemical change, to cause this traumatic brain injury, what would be a pre-existing condition? Are you saying that somebody who had a concussion previously? Is it somebody who just has a bunch of, some sort of other orthopedic injury? Or what is that pre-existing condition that could cause a kind of compound the concussion, the brain injury that you have in the moment?
You just named one of the most important ones,
okay,
which is the previous concussion. So the people who are having concussion, they are having more chance to have another concussion or more concussions.
So from my understanding, when you have a concussion, one concussion plus one concussion doesn't mean 2 concussions, right? It means 3, 4. It could be exponentially worse, right? The symptoms that come up after more concussions.
Absolutely. We don't know exactly why, but we can say that as a result of the previous injuries, for some reason, they are prone to develop more because of cognitive issues or something is going on. We don't know exactly. So previous concussion or having history of concussion in the past is one of the major ones. Having a history of migraines.
Yes.
Having history of ADHD.
Really? ADHD?
ADHD. Having history of depression and anxiety or PTSD in the past.
These can make the symptoms from the concussion, from the traumatic brain injury worse.
Absolutely. And so if you're asking what are the factors that we can predict this patient possibly. We don't know. Still, we don't know. There is no way to predict. But if these are existing there is a chance that patient is going to have a prolonged course.
So a person who suffered a brain injury, a traumatic brain injury, a mild traumatic brain injury, a concussion, some of the things that they and their family might want to look at is what has happened to them before. Have they had depression? Have they had PTSD? Have they had another concussion? These are the kind of things that when a patient or a plaintiff shows up to you, this is probably some of the stuff that you want to know.
That is so important to know about the pre-existing conditions. And another important thing is this. A lot of family, especially if this happens to children and the kids, they the new injury, they're going to think this is from the previous history, a previous condition. So they don't pay much attention. They think that, attention deficit is now flaring up, or depression is a little bit flaring up, or anxiety is a little bit flaring up, or headaches are worse because of that. No, it's not just that.
So it's not just the pre-existing condition.
It's not just the pre-existing. Okay. Actually, these patients needs to have a faster and sooner evaluation and treatment because they have a chance. They have more chance to have a prolonged course and recovery.
Would you say then, from what I'm hearing, if you were a loved one you think had a traumatic brain injury, and that you know that you or that loved one has had these histories in the past, you want to get to a neurologist as soon as you can?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then is there some sort of aggressive approach that somebody with the pre-existing condition who then has a TBI as a traumatic brain injury, that if they get to the neurologist, can you kind of attack it stronger and hopefully have a better outcome long term?
So the sooner you start the treatment and evaluation and diagnostic, whatever needed, the better outcome for sure for those patients. Again, there are patients with the pre-existing conditions. And they, in terms of the treatment and any kind of treatment or therapy, they have to be started sooner because we know that these are not going to have the same chance of recovery with other people who don't have pre-existing.
They're in a weaker state that they need a little bit extra protection.
Absolutely.
Now, so here's one of the things that I know. With the traumatic brain injury, it's not just cognitive, right? There's an emotional aspect to it, and so for you as the neurologist, it seems that you're not looking at one narrow lane. As a neurologist, you have to look at the whole person.
Absolutely. So we have three categories of or classes of symptoms.
Okay.
And symptomatology, basically. One of them is physical symptoms: headache, nausea. Blurry vision, dizziness, balance issues. We have a series of cognitive issues.
Okay.
Brain slowness, difficulty in concentration, difficulty in multitasking, forgetfulness. And then we have sets of the psychological issues and symptoms, such as anxiety, stress, PTSD, typical one, lack of sleep, irritability, mood disorders. So basically, when we are looking at the patient, we'd like to see all of those, or at least one or two symptoms of each of those classes. And based on the severity, we have to focus in terms of the treatment.
So what I'm hearing is that for those who have a traumatic brain injury or those who suspect they have a traumatic brain injury, they really need to look at their whole background and kind of document things before they show up to the neurologist, so that when they show up to the neurologist, they can give the neurologist, like you, the full kind of picture of what's going on.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And then so what are some of the things that you can do? So somebody shows up and they have two areas, perhaps three areas. You have some forgetfulness, you have some emotional aspects, you have kind of lack of sleep, which is causing some other things. What are some of the kind of the healing processes, the healing procedures? Who are other? Do you bring in other doctors? What do you do from a treatment perspective?
Great question. First of all, there's no one magic pill.
Okay.
For this. This is not an infectious issue, says you got to get antibiotic, amoxicillin, and you're going to get better in 10 days. No. Yeah. We have to see what the problems are. Again, we have 20 symptoms or 20 and 3 different classes of issues. We're going to go each one, which one is more a prominent problem.
Yeah.
Pain in the acute setting, either headache or spinal pain, such as neck or back pain, are the major issues that need to be addressed. After the first acute phase, the acute phase, which is around first month, when we are dealing with the pain issues, then we're going to see the real face of the cognitive issues and other physical issues, such as dizziness and balance.
So this is not something that just presents itself. This is something that takes time. And so you're saying in essence, there's layers of it. So you have this physical pain that's associated with the event that caused the traumatic brain injury. And then as that starts to kind of dissipate, as that starts to heal, there's other gophers that pop up out of the ground, is what you're saying?
That is very true statement. That's what you said. However, we need to have symptoms based on the guidelines and diagnostic criteria, even in the first 72 hours.
Okay.
So they might not be the prominent symptoms, such as neck pain, back pain, headache. However, we need to have symptoms.
So can you give me an example of, so you're saying with the traumatic brain injury, in order to be able to diagnose it down the road, you need to see within the first 72 hours that there was some sort of symptom. You've got your big ones, your neck, your back. What are some of the other symptoms that you would look at in your everyday practice?
Absolutely. Basically, headaches are one of the major things.
Okay.
After that, dizziness and balance issues.
And could that present itself within that first 72-hour phrase?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one of the major things that I am asking patients is that actually having dizziness or not having dizziness or balance issues is going to be a question for me.
Okay.
That is a real dizziness. If this is a real TBI or just the headache. Okay. So there are a lot of issues or diagnoses, other diagnoses can mimic TBI at the acute phase, including post-traumatic headaches. So post-traumatic headaches are not TBI,
okay,
but most of the patients with TBI having post-traumatic headaches. So it's very important for us to separate this diagnosis because that can have a lot of consequences and also a stigma in the future for the patient and the diagnosis again.
Yeah.
So there are a few things we need to really know. So anxiety,
okay,
and mood changes, and the sleep disorders are very common.
And when does that present itself? When can it present itself? With the TBI, when can the sleep disorder, the anxiety, these sort of kind of serious issues present themselves?
In order to make a diagnosis, again, we are sticking to the guideline.
Yes.
As I mentioned before, there is no specific symptom for traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
So if we don't put them together when there is in the right context, and specifically very important in a real impact, you cannot make this diagnosis. So basically, in order to make this diagnosis, you have to have two symptoms.
Okay.
Two symptoms at least in the first 72 hours or at the time of the accident.
Yeah.
So you cannot have just a neck pain or just one headache, nothing else. And then 3 months, 4 months, you're going to refer to a neurologist for having other issues, and you're going to say, oh, did I have brain injury at the time or not? It's hard to say. Cognitive issues, in my experience that you are seeing it, that's the last thing comes up.
Okay.
The patients are blaming their brain slowness, their forgetfulness, everything in the first 2-3 months, even 6 months because of the pain, suffering, anxiety. They're not working. They just blame that. And after that, when everything else is settled, then they see, wow, this is not the cognitive function that I had before this accident.
So, there's two big things I see right here. One is that, well, I should say three. One major one and two kind of subtopics, right? It's very complicated, right? And so on the first hand, it's got to be very complicated for the patient, for the personal injury victim who's dealing with or potentially dealing with a traumatic brain injury. Knowing what is going on, having that self-awareness, having friends and family around you who are there, and then secondarily for you as the doctor to peel away all of these layers and really get down to it. This isn't something that you can do in a 15-minute encounter, can you?
Absolutely. Actually, you just said exactly the fact. Let me tell you that I'm expert. I'm certified, board certified in brain injury, and I'm seeing a lot of patients.
Yeah.
Still, there are cases. I'm scratching my hair. I don't know if it's a real case or not.
Yeah.
So that's why we are sticking to the guideline. Otherwise, we're going to be distracted. If you have 10 neurologists, no matter they are certified or not, or board certified or trained in brain injury, if you give them a case to 10 of them, you're not going to see a answer, a kind of unified answer.
Yes,
you're going to see different opinion and different diagnosis. So even for us, it's hard to make a diagnosis after many, many years dealing with the traumatic brain injury and having a lot of science about it.
Yeah. So I think my kind of final question here has to do with, if it's this hard for smart, educated, board-certified neurologists, what is your advice, what is your suggestions that potential patients, personal injury victims who think maybe I've got a traumatic brain injury or something associated with that, what is it that they can do to, one, get to a neurologist, and then once they do get the appointment with the neurologist, what is it they can bring to you? What story can they tell you to better help you make that diagnosis?
So for us, again, we don't see 80 to 90% of the cases. Every testing is normal.
Yeah.
So this is a diagnosis we make with the patient in the room.
Okay.
So they have to give us as much as possible information.
About their
data, history, everything. And then impact. It's so important for us to see the mechanism of action.
Okay.
What happened in the impact? Is this impact compatible with the patient can have a brain injury or not? Because every impact, they're not the same. Even it's a rear-ended, for instance, car accident, but they're not the same. We know that, and you know that.
Absolutely.
So it's we have the more information we have at the time of interview, the better chance to come up with the right diagnosis.
And then whether there is a traumatic brain injury or there isn't a traumatic brain injury, what I'm hearing from you is that if a victim thinks that they may have a traumatic brain injury, they need to come prepared with being able to describe the impact, what happened, what was the forces. They have to be able to just tell you how they felt within the first 72 hours, and they have to have some sort of documentation, some sort of history that they can explain to you about what they were like beforehand. Do they have a pre-existing issue? And then what has happened to them in the weeks and months since then?
As a physician, for me, just having those information enough.
Yeah.
If they are going to have a medical legal case, documentation, it's a significant issue.
Yeah.
So they have to know that, first of all, they should not leave this alone.
Yeah.
The brain injury can be disabling if they don't get treated correctly and soon as possible. However, med-legal cases are different. In med-legal cases, documentation is the major thing.
Yeah.
They have to take care of it.
Well, and for me as a personal injury attorney, one of my biggest concerns is not just like I take a two-pronged approach to it. I want to get them justice, but then I want them to get better. And so, Doctor, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been fantastic. I think, this is a very, very huge iceberg, right? And we have seen just the tip of it.
Absolutely.
But I look forward to hopefully someday we can have this conversation again and continue on.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now's a good time for a short break. Stay with us. There's more ahead on Unseen Impact.
Hey, it's Daniel from Beyond the Doors. We're super excited to be a part of the OLAS Media Network, recording right here in San Diego, alongside some amazing podcasts. There's a host of wonderful shows from all types of genres. Basically, like real estate, there's a little something for all walks of life. You won't want to miss it. So head over to olasmedia.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow or subscribe while you're there. Now, let's get back to the show.
Welcome back. Let's continue the conversation.
Well, that was fantastic talking with a quadruple board certified neurologist. And I guess the biggest thing that I hope people take away from this is brain injuries are really, really complicated. And not just at the beginning, not just at the middle, not just at the end. From start to finish, they are complicated. From the mechanism of injury, meaning how it happened, to the symptoms that you suffer in the first 72 hours, in the first weeks, in the first months, it's very complicated. So what I want listeners to take away from here is, if you sense something in yourself or in a loved one, start having that self-awareness. Start taking notes. Start really thinking about, well, could this be related? What is going on? Is it just the pain? Once the pain gets over, what else is going on? And so kind of some of the tips that I have for you is document, document. And it can be something as simple on your iPhone where you're just saying, or you're on your phone with the messages, you're saying da-da-da, or your notes, just writing down. If it's once a day, if it's once a week, if it's once a month, just take a moment and have some self-reflection and think, hey, what's going on with me? How am I doing? What are some of the issues that I have? Is this headache that, maybe I used to have headaches, but now this one is a little bit worse than it was before. So recognizing that maybe you had some symptoms before, but now that's just a little bit worse, that counts. Have it documented. One of the biggest things is if you think anything is going on, whether with you or a friend, call us, message us. Go to the Rory Law website, www.rorylaw.com. Engage with the website. Sign up for us. One of my biggest jobs is just to talk with people. So you can tell me your stories. I see a bunch of these things, so I start to recognize the similarities. I can cut right to the heart of what you need to look at, and together we can kind of figure out what's going on. And so part of that is I get questions, right? Whether it's at the intake, whether it's throughout it all of the litigation, the pre-litigation process, or it's just folks engaging with us on social media. I get questions. So what I want to do is answer a few of them. So first off, and this is a good one, right? Can I file a lawsuit for a mild traumatic brain injury? And the answer is absolutely. I can file a lawsuit for what they call mild traumatic brain injury. I think one of the things that we learned today is that the term mild is a misnomer. Just because it's deemed mild, or by the guidelines, as Dr. Bahreman said, is mild, it doesn't mean that the impact on your ability to function is mild. It just means that the way that they have classified it, that it's mild with respect to the brain injuries. Still, it can keep you up at night. It can cause anxiety. It can cause debilitating headaches. It can make your life debilitating. And all of those are damages, right? Damages are what really drive lawsuits. Okay, a great question that we get a lot that I love to answer is, what damages can I recover in a brain injury lawsuit? In a brain injury lawsuit, you can recover medical bills, past and future, loss of income, loss of earnings capacity, meaning your ability to do what you did before, the pain and suffering and emotional distress. And this is what is really huge in this area. Basically, it comes down to a quality of life. This country was founded on the idea that we get to pursue our happiness. And the pursuit of our happiness comes down to our quality of life. And when the quality of life is diminished, it's cut back, or it's just fully taken from you, those are the actual damages that you get. Now, when it comes to brain injuries, typically, unfortunately, it's longer term. So you're looking at the cost of that longer term, right? When we do the damages analysis, when we look at this, we're not just looking at, hey, what's it going to be like in the first week, in the first month? We're talking about what is it going to be like from the date that this happened to you until the end of your life. And this is important stuff. One question I get often is, how long do I have to file a brain injury claim? Now, what I like to back up and say, hey, any claim. So this isn't just specific to brain injuries, but typically in California, you have 2 years to bring a lawsuit. Now, however, if there is a government entity like the city, a county, Caltrans, some sort of government body, you only have 6 months to file what they call a government tort claim. And so what that is you have to go to the actual web page or communicate with the actual agency and say, hey, what form do you have so I can fill out? You have to fill out that form, and this is a hard date, 6 months. Then they have 45 days in which they have to deny or accept it. They're going to deny it. And then once you get the denial, you have only 6 months to file the lawsuit. So how much time do I have to file a brain injury case? Typically 2 years. If it's a government entity, you got 6 months. And I know 6 months might seem like a long time. It's not. It goes very, very quickly. Another big question that I get are, how do attorneys prove a brain injury in court? Now, when explaining how do you prove anything in court, there's a lot of similarities with this, right? And there's a lot of sort of the process that we do that's particular to us in, really digging into our plaintiff's life, our client's life, their friends, their family. The brain injury is a little bit more difficult because what you have to do, as we heard from Dr. Bahreman, he's looking at what was the impact like? Not necessarily saying impact to the brain, right? But impact that caused the sort of movement in the body that caused this traumatic brain injury. What was the impact like? You have to say, what happened to you? What symptoms were you having in the first 72 hours? That's really tough because most of the time you're in shock, you have physical pain, you don't necessarily know what's going on there. And then kind of for the following weeks and for the following months, you have to kind of document what are your injuries. So in looking at what do you have to prove brain injury and court, what was the impact? What happened in the first 72 hours? What are your symptoms that have been since the impact? And a big thing for the neurologist, which of course is for us, is did you have any pre-existing conditions before? Did you have a previous concussion or concussions? Did you have depression? Did you have PTSD? These are all items that are necessary for proving a traumatic brain injury in court. Another big question that we get is, my loved one has a brain injury and can't make decisions. Can I act on their behalf? And the answer is yes. If your loved one has a brain injury in which that person is incapacitated, you can absolutely act on their behalf. It happens a couple ways usually. Typically, if you have an estate plan set before, this happens, and you have designated somebody to make these health decisions on your behalf, that person automatically gets to do it. Secondarily, you can have either a legal guardian, which usually is a spouse, a family member. If there are none, you can have one appointed, or a conservator of some respect, and those folks can make those decisions on your behalf. This is a great one that I do get. As an attorney at Rory Law, what types of accidents do I most often see leading to brain injuries? And really, especially those that go unseen, are rear-end auto crashes where you have that whiplash motion. And it doesn't have to be huge property damage. I've got one right now, very wonderful lady, who she felt a big impact, right? She had that impact. And that whiplash, as we talked about before, you have that hard skull, that hard cranium, and that kind of different density, that gelatinous brain. And when they start to kind of not dance with each other, as we talked about with Dr. Bahreman, you can have this sort of brain injury. And so it's the motor vehicle rear end crashes where I see this most often, at least with respect to those that are unseen. For instance, I've had a number of motorcycle crashes that were significant and they were bad and they were nasty. And you just know that it happened, right? When you have a banged up helmet, a scraped up helmet, somebody thrown 25, 30 feet, you know that it's big. Where I'm looking at is where I most see this unseen brain injury are these rear end or kind of side impacts. And it doesn't have to be a big property damage, big damage to the vehicle. Now, this question is what I get the most, and I should. How much does it cost to hire Rory Law, hire an attorney for a brain injury case? Well, first off, there's no separation between any injury and a brain injury case. Attorneys like me, attorneys at Rory Law, we are what's called contingency fee attorneys. And what a contingency fee means is that I get nothing until and unless I produce for you. What I love about that is it means, one, I have to get to know you, right? And I have to believe in this case. Am I going to spend potentially thousands of hours and potentially tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of my dollars to fight this case, right? So there's a real sort of fire behind it for me to get behind it and to go for it. I do not get paid by the hour. And if something bad happens, you don't pay me anything. What the contingency fee means is that whether it's a contingency fee on a brain injury, a contingency fee on any sort of other injury, it means I only get paid if I produce. Thank you all for listening to Unseen Impact. I am Rory Pendergast, your host, the attorney at Rory Law. If anyone has any questions about anything, wondering about our services, please visit us at www.rorylaw.com. That is www.rorylaw.com. Also, we have all sorts of social media accounts. All of them are at Rory Law Firm. So again, at RORYLAWFIRM. We are here to answer any questions, talk about your case, whatever you need. Rory Law at Unseen Impact, we're here for you.
Thanks for tuning in to Unseen Impact with Rory Pendergast. Please follow, subscribe, and maybe share this episode with someone who's walking their own path to recovery or justice. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn at Rory Law Firm. To learn more about legal services or get in touch, visit rorylaw.com. Unseen Impact is recorded in San Diego, California, and proudly produced by OLAS Media, an IVC media company.
Media.